Let's talk about Election Day in the U.S. and what this means for geopolitics and indeed the economy of the world. I'm joined by Voice of America's News Center reporter, Catherine Gibson, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Catherine, thank you for joining us on the program. How's your Election Day going so far? Have you voted yourself?
I already voted, and like many Americans, I voted early by mail-in ballot. And that's what we're seeing increasingly, not only since COVID, since the pandemic forced many to vote by mail, but it's become an accepted thing. You know, a third of the United States had already voted before today, Election Day. So we'll be able to see some of those early trends come in before the polls even close tonight.
And that's an interesting highlight in this election, Catherine. If you're following the early voting numbers, I heard that almost 82 million people have already cast their ballots before Election Day. That's a record-breaking number, right?
As far as I understand it, yes, that's right. And more importantly, what we're seeing in the key swing states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, we're already seeing just this morning levels of voting that are matching 2020, and we still have hours and hours of voting to go. So we're going to be getting a record turnout this year, I think.
Do you think that has any significant impact on this election, the numbers?
That's a great question. You know, the conventional wisdom here in the United States is that the more women who are turning out to vote, the better that is for Kamala Harris. Of course, if she is elected, she would be the first female president of the United States. And we've had a lot of discussion in this country about abortion rights and reproductive rights. The thinking is that that motivates more and more women to get to the polls for Kamala Harris with the concern in the back of their heads that President Donald Trump would cut back on those rights.
I know there are many key issues that will determine how Americans vote today, from the economy to immigration, abortion issues, and what have you. But do you think that people are mainly just going to vote because Kamala is a woman, you know, a woman of color and a South Asian history?
I think it's a whole mix of things. I think that each voter takes their own personal mix into the voting booth. They, you know, may highlight that she's South Asian. They may be more interested that she would be the first female president, or they may be voting on the economy. It really is a individual mix for each voter when they go into that ballot box. Absolutely.
Catherine, polls are predicting a keenly contested tight race where Harris and Trump are neck on neck in some battleground states. Will pollsters be right this time? Because they got it wrong in 2016. And poll didn't also quite envisage a slim margin of win in 2020. There is now AI and big data. Do you think that what we're hearing is going to mirror the reality?
Well, that's a fascinating question that many Americans themselves are asking. A lot of people were burned in 2016 by the polls being so far off base. And a lot of pollsters said that they were correcting for that in 2020. Of course, 2020 was a unique time because of the COVID pandemic. People stayed at home, people early voting by mail. It was a little bit hard to parse. I think this is the first election where we'll get a sense if pollsters have been able to adapt their models and really correctly intuit what voters are thinking and feeling. But right now, we really, really are seeing a tight neck-and-neck race, so we just don't know.
Personally, do you think that the figures can just go awry or spike beyond what the polls are saying? Is that something you consider a possibility in this election?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of reasons why the polls couldn't be picking up things. I think there's been a generational shift, people just simply not answering their phones. I think that AI, as you mentioned, being used in polling is still in its infancy and is still adapting and changing and learning how voters vote. So I think there are a lot of unknowns here that we're going to have to see it play out in this election.
Turnout will be key, and the main candidates are counting on it. We saw Harris literally knocking on doors yesterday in Pennsylvania. About two-thirds, 66% of the voting eligible population turned out in 2020, an upward of 160 million voters. It's perhaps the highest rate of any national election since 1900s. What are your expectations this year? You think more voters will come out?
I absolutely do think they will. I think it's been such an unpredictable election season. so many incredible things have happened. We've had an attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump, not once, but twice. We had the Democratic nominee switching very late in the campaign season. Kamala Harris had to mount an entire campaign in just about 100 days. We've never seen an election season like this in the United States. And so I think that translates to more voters being involved and being engaged, wanting to voice how all of this turns out.
Let's take a short break and we'll be back with this conversation. Stay with us, everyone.
Inflation will end. Your taxes will be cut massively.
We need a president who works for all the American people.
Hello, TVC Communications. How can I help?
What makes TVC the right choice for my business?
Excellent question, sir. Let me share some exciting facts with you.
Start your day on TVC with Wake Up Nigeria, a family and lifestyle show. Your view empowers women globally.
It's your view, let it count.
Entertainment Splash delivers the hottest celebrity trends. On TVC News, we keep you informed with breaking news and in-depth analysis of events shaping the world.
I will continue to speak the truth.
TVC News at 7 and TVC News at 10 p.m. delivers the most important stories of the day. Max FM, your hit music radio station, captivates listeners daily across Lagos and Abuja, making every commute more enjoyable. Adaba 88.9 FM is not left out, as it is the voice of Southwest. And on TVC Digital, we reach to million viewers daily. All together pulls in over 17 million viewers daily. Contact us on 0707-272-8338 or marketing at tvccommunications.tv. Partner with TVC Communications today. Let's grow together.
Inflation will end. Your taxes will be cut massively.
We need a president who works for all the American people.
It's election day in America. All eyes on the U.S. and especially as the world waits to find out who the 47th U.S. president will be. Catherine Gibson is a reporter with VOA News Center in Washington, D.C. Thank you for staying the course on the program this evening. We've seen what seems a toxic campaign with intense and negative comments throughout the campaign period. What does this say about how people will vote today?
Well, there's been some really interesting rhetoric from the Trump campaign in these final days of the election season. We've heard some slurs against Kamala Harris, which, always a lot of women in this country are very sensitive to the first female potential president being called by unflattering names, being slurred, all of those things. That may motivate female voters to come out to the polls. And also on the other side, Kamala Harris recently has taken to playing clips of former President Trump at her rallies, really using his own words against him to convince voters, as she says, that Trump is not stable enough to serve as president. So really, we're seeing a lot of personal arguments for and against the characters of each candidate.
At some point, it literally became an attack on personalities, and the world is watching keenly that how did the American politics, come so low? Precisely how are voters reacting to how these candidates have actually carried themselves throughout the campaign period? Do you think this is what they want as content on election year, or they would have preferred some more issue-based conversation?
It's funny, whenever I go around the country reporting and talking to voters, they always say they hate the way this country is turned so partisan, that we have this ritual rhetoric that just each candidate is saying things about the other. They feel very team-based. They feel like the other side can't see their own experience. It's been really tough these last few election cycles. They always say that, but when it comes down to it, a lot of American voters do like that sense of team play, that they belong to a certain candidate's camp and that they will fight for that. Of course, we have to say that we saw a marked increase in that on January 6, 2021, when former President Trump's supporters attacked the U.S. Capitol to subvert the electoral process. That was a marker in American democracy that really changed the way we talk about politics. We are not going to be able to go back from that. We are looking at how things will change today. There's a sense that what happened on January 6th can either keep on going or we can go back and settle things down. It's going to be really interesting to see how that all plays out today with the results.
Well, Trump indeed was convicted, was accused by the Justice Department of election interference, after that. But how much impact is that having on voters, really? Because it's become so popular. It looks like the more mods you throw at him, the more popular he's become. And even Democrats are now becoming fidgeting in states prior to this time used to be blue.
Well, it's an interesting concept that a candidate could lose in 2020, encourages supporters to attack the U.S. Capitol, and then come back and be his party's nominee. Usually when you lose a presidential election, you do not come back the next election cycle as the party's nominee. So we're in a little bit of uncharted territory here in terms of that. We also know that President Trump's base is very loyal to him, and he has been able to make inroads with younger men. He has, from what we can tell of the polling, now we won't know until the actual votes are counted, that he may be building a little bit more support among younger men. But again, I caution, we're going to wait until those votes are counted, and we have real data to see what President Trump's support looks like 4 years later.
We have no choice than to wait, but the result of this election is going to be very, very impactful. Let's talk about the cost of living, which has become a main issue in this election. Since COVID, we heard that prices have skyrocketed in the U.S. We've had Trump ask Americans if they think lives are better today than it was 4 years ago. How much of a disadvantage is that for the Democratic candidate?
Well, that's been a huge issue in this election because, of course, Kamala Harris is running as something of an incumbent. She is the vice president for the sitting president, Joe Biden, who has made the argument that he really brought the country back from the brink. We were in a bad shape during COVID under the Trump presidency, and he had to do a lot of work to really rebuild the economy and make sure that it didn't fall into recession. Many of the economic markers are very positive, showing that the country is indeed bouncing back. But that really doesn't matter if a lot of Americans at the lower levels feel like the cost of living is tough, that they'll never be able to buy a house, that the cost of groceries is too much. And that's really where President Trump is making his argument, that they were better off 4 years ago when he was president, and he's going to make America great again, as his campaign slogan says.
And there are some who believe him, actually, because if they don't, he won't be on the ballot. But let's quickly look at the impact of this on the outcome of this election on world peace. There are people who are disgruntled about how the Biden-led administration has handled relations with Israel, with the war in Gaza and how it's spread across the Middle East, and the concerns about the impact on insecurity globally. Not much has been done with enforcing the two-state solution, and Harris is now promising to resolve that if she becomes president. Well, there are some who hold very dearly to their heart that this is an extension of the Biden administration. What are conversations like in America in this regard?
Well, one of the most important things we'll be watching when the polls close tonight is the results in Michigan. Michigan is one of a handful of swing states across the nation that decides who secures the enough electoral college votes to win the presidency. So Michigan's importance cannot be overstated, and it has a high Muslim American, Arab American population, many of whom in the primary protest voted and chose either to remain uncommitted and not vote for then candidate Joe Biden, or to vote for a third party candidate, which the thinking is peels votes away from Democrats and ultimately benefits the Republican candidate, former President Trump. So a lot of questions here in the United States as to how that protest Gaza vote will go and if it will impact the vote in key swing states.
Absolutely. There are some who have questioned whether Harris has been able to completely dissociate herself from Biden's policy in this regard. But Trump is also promising to continue building its walls and deporting illegal immigrants. They say that resonates very well with traditional Americans, right?
It resonates with some Americans, absolutely. And as you said, that's why former President Trump is once again on the ballot after losing in the 2020 election. His message does resonate with a certain amount of the American population, and he certainly has commandeered the Republican Party under his control. All of the Republican senators, even though they may express disagreements privately with his style, his leadership, they have come under his wing and they support him. And I think that's an important point to bring up, too. It's not just the presidency on the ballot this year. It's also control of the U.S. Congress, which will be absolutely crucial in determining the way the country moves in the next 2 to 4 years.
Indeed. Catherine, we have to go now, but U.S. election results have sometimes been declared within hours of the poll closing. This year's tight contest could mean a longer wait. Some are saying it could take a while. The media couldn't really predict a winner in 2020 until 4 days after the election. When do you think it's possible for us to know who has won?
Well, that all depends on whether the polls, as we were discussing earlier, have caught on, and they are correct that this is indeed a very close race that is in a tie. If that is correct, then it will absolutely be not an election day, as I've been saying, but an election week. However, if the polls are off and they're not capturing interest for one or the other candidates, and it is much more of a definitive win, then we may see it in the early hours of Wednesday morning. So either way, at this point, as we have 7 or 8 more hours of voting to go on the East Coast of the United States, there's still a lot left up in the air.
Absolutely it is. Catherine Gibson, reporter with VOA, thank you so much for talking to us on the program this evening.
So welcome.
That's our show today. You can watch it again at midnight and at 6 a.m. We're back with more conversation at 7 p.m. Stay with us, everyone.
Inflation will end. Your taxes will be cut massively.